And we're live. Hello, I'm Anawiltos, and welcome to an amazing, I guess you could call this a podcast interview. Who cares what it is? Please introduce yourself, my esteemed guest.
Help, he kidnapped me.
That's a very interesting accusation.
Just kidding. Hi, I'm CWal. I am another fellow anon on the internet. Have my own opinions and like to share them from time to time.
Really? So you're one of those individuals that has his own opinions. What is an opinion of yours, for example?
Granny Smith apples are the best apples on the planet.
You know, I respect that. I like Granny Smith. They're, in my opinion, very good. Great for making an apple pie, if you ask me.
I eat
Which,
them fucking raw, man.
yeah, I like them raw as well. Sometimes I like having a raw tomato just on its own. You know, bite into it, it's pretty juicy. If you ever seen one,
Not really.
no, uh, trust me, man. Tomatoes, they're pretty good. But anyway, what are you eating right now?
Just munching on a Granny Smith apple after work. And
Yeah.
I've got the oven heating up in the other room, so I may need to step away for a moment later on to deal with that.
Okay. What's cooking, man?
I'm just making some croissant roll things.
Yeah,
Keeping it
croissant.
simple. Yeah, keeping it simple for dinner tonight.
Keeping it simple. Yeah, I had some couscous as is common in these parts. That's right, lads and lasses. Couscous is making a comeback. We're going to get more couscous coming down everywhere. Uh, in Morocco, in the U.S., we're gonna bring them into Britain. Uh, you know, one thing leaves, another thing comes. Britain leaves the EU, but couscous comes to Britain. That's my dream for the future, anyway.
So, would you call yourself a couscous supremacist?
I wouldn't say supremacist. I just think that some foods are better than others. And for example, one thing that I think I would be very happy getting rid of is pumpkin. Um, that's just my opinion, though.
I'm gonna go with soft agree.
Soft degree. So you maybe like pumpkin in some situations, but not in others.
I like them to make jack o' lanterns. That's about it.
Jack o' lanterns. Yeah, yeah. You ever tried making one out of a turnip?
No,
No. Yeah, that's a real classic. I heard that that's how people used to make them before they had pumpkins.
I don't think that area region of the world even had other gourds other than something or gourd like that could do it.
Yeah, but yeah, I think that's great that we have something in common, that we both perhaps aren't the most fond individuals of a taste of pumpkin, but are you perhaps fond of the idea of a second Mexican intervention?
Where's my fucking doughboy hat?
So you're up for it?
Look, they've been really shitty neighbors for a long time, and at what point do they violate the nap?
That's true. If you can't manage your own yard, then maybe you should step up for some responsibility, or perhaps ask for help. And there you go.
Step up or step aside.
Yep. And I'm not saying that we necessarily have to conquer Mexico, but if we gotta solve the problem somehow.
Yes, Americans are literally dying.
Yep. They're dying, and Mexicans are dying too. Let's be fair here. So I think it's
Oh yeah,
perhaps a win-win situation uh, if all these issues with the cartels and further down in Chiapas, you've got the Zapatistas. If those things get resolved, that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that shit with the cartel. Some of the stories that have come out that some of the girls that survived the initial onslaught were then raped, then killed, and thrown into shallow graves. As Trump put it, some of these guys are just animals.
Yeah, and when he's talking about that, I think he was specifically referring to MS-13,
Mm-hmm. A
which is
gang.
which yeah, MS-13, which is interesting because it's not even a Mexican gang. It's from uh, immigrants in the I believe in California from Salvador. So, but I guess it's spread further down into Mexico and other parts of the U.S.
Well, it started in the U.S. and it's actually spread to their home countries.
Yeah, and I've got some contacts in Guatemala, and they tell me that they didn't used to have a lot of gang violence like they have now, but because of the political instability in Salvador, people were crossing over the border, and that brought a lot of gang violence into Guatemala, where there previously hadn't been as much. So perhaps something there might need to be dealt with.
They need to either step up or step aside as well.
Yep. But what's your favorite science fiction?
Oh Lord, the problem is there's so many different subsets of science fiction,
That's true.
and I'm one of those weird guys in media that I don't really have favorites. I have things that I enjoy, but I don't really put ranks on them.
Okay, okay. Give me one thing that you very much enjoy.
Star Wars expanded universe
Star Wars
before
expanded
Disney fucked
universe.
it up.
Okay, so I guess what would now be called Star Wars
Legacy,
Legends,
legacy and legends.
Legacy and Legends. Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I only have a passing familiarity with that exact expanded stuff.
My knowledge is more not from actually reading the books, but more from the wikis as well as the tabletop Star Wars games that popped up.
Yeah,
Each
yeah.
one of
I
these
heard you're
systems.
pretty big on the tabletop games.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
D and
spent a lot
D,
of time reading
Pathfinder,
the wikis and
Shadowrun,
stuff. Yeah,
Star Wars, Star Trek. I've touched a lot of different systems.
yeah, yeah. I'm a bit of a trekker myself. I do power scaling on a number of different things. And that, of course, is a very contentious subject among certain groups, trying to calculate which would be better, which would be worse,
Mhm.
this, that, and the other thing. You know,
Yeah.
Star Trek, Star Wars, Stargate, Battlestar
Oh
Galactica.
God, Stargate. I loved Atlantis.
Yeah, yeah, I love Stargate as well. Atlantis was very good. I like SG-1 as well too. I wasn't that into.
SG-1 has the problem of going back to it in recent years. I found it's really clunky. It is really clunky, but that just could be a sign of the times.
Yeah, but I think it certainly has its good moments.
Oh yeah, it does. It's just the first half of the show roughly is, as I said, clunky to say the least.
Yeah, but I would say that I guess the last two seasons would be ones that a lot of fans didn't like as much, perhaps.
Yeah, they were weaker just because the Ori was basically a recycling of the earlier plots, and some of the characters they brought in to replace the other characters, they were good. It's just they weren't the same.
Yeah, they hadn't had the same amount of establishment as the other characters had, because by then the show had been running for 8 years.
Mhm.
So you've got, let's say, Mitchell, who shows up in season 8, sorry, in season 9, and he's supposed to be now the main central lead. When then you've got Carter, who's been there from the beginning. So
Yeah, it's one of the things you think Carter would have been chosen, and then Mitchell would have been brought in as the number two.
yeah, but I guess I don't know what the explanation for that would be in universe, but
Uh, I'm thinking it's one of those things that Carter as a character fit more of that supporting role.
yeah.
To be
Also,
honest, I mean, she's the
yeah,
engineer. Look, she's a decent fighter,
yeah,
but she's the engineer.
yeah. Also, she's a lower rank as well.
Yeah. Well, she was lieutenant colonel, and a lot of SG teams that weren't SG1 were led by guys that were like major or lower in some cases. I think there were a couple that were led like by captains.
That is true. Yeah, I don't think they had a necessarily consistent scheming for exactly what rank they would want to lead the SG teams.
Yeah. Then there's Atlantis, where you had the McKay go from annoying as sin to a flawed but lovable guy.
Yeah, yeah. McKay definitely is one of those characters that, in principle, just reading, you might think maybe he's an annoying character, but as the show goes on, he just he's just very likable in the way that he has
Some
these
call it
quirkiness.
lovable son of a bitch,
Yeah,
though that's not a perfect one in his case.
yeah, because he does have his kinder moments.
Yep.
Yeah, and then of course there's Zelenka. Uh,
Yep.
that's a good
Yeah.
one. Originally just a background character, but I guess got fleshed out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
And his dynamic with Rodney both changed and didn't change at the same time.
yeah,
Certain things always remain the same, but there was a mutual respect that they grew for each other near the end. You had Carson Beckett. His fucking death in that series was so heartbreaking
yeah,
because he was such a likable character, and you saw that kind of softer side of McKay. Though they did bring in, I'm forgetting her name, but that female doctor that was I thought was very good.
yeah. She was good too. I've seen her in some other stuff as well. I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
think of it off the top of my head, but
I know I've
yeah,
seen her on other things, and she did fine. So,
yeah,
but the thing about her that I kind of liked is she was able to get McKay to calm the fuck down pretty hard.
yeah,
Then you had Amanda Tapping take over for season 4, if I remember right, or was it? Yeah, season 3. No, season 3. Because seasons 1 and 2 were Waller was leading the expedition. She did great. Then you had Amanda Tapping Carter take over for season 3, and then you had Woolsey, who was
yeah,
excellent.
yeah. Robert Picardo,
Yeah, the Doctor
Voyager.
from Voyager. Yeah,
Yeah,
you can never go wrong with him.
yeah. I think he was great in Voyager too. Uh,
Oh yeah, he was great.
yeah, definitely had a lot of character development, which a lot of other characters in Voyager didn't have. Um,
Yeah,
for
um,
example, Harry Kim didn't have pretty much any character development. Well,
a
maybe a
bit,
little
but
bit.
not much. A
Yeah,
bit, but not much. Torres kind of calmed down. That was her big thing.
yeah,
Paris became more responsible. Janeway was Janeway. Don't fuck with Janeway.
yeah. And Chakotay, I don't think he changed at all.
Uh, I think he started out as distrusting the Federation, but pretty quickly came to trust his captain. So
Yeah, but he he already was in a sense uh, a sort of nice guy in that sense. So it's not as if it was a huge change, but rather something that was more a situational change. But of course, Neelix is a controversial character.
I
Um,
liked him.
yeah, I think Neelix is good at many times, but other times there's a
He
few
can be
times.
insufferable.
Yeah,
Just like Harry Kim, he's likable, but he has insufferable moments.
yeah,
They're basically the opposite end of the insufferable character trope that was Wesley Crusher. where there
Yeah.
were moments where Wesley was tolerable, but then most of the time he was insufferable.
Yeah. With Wesley, they tried to get the this sort of boy genius thing going. Uh, I guess it was to be relatable, but
Later Wesley Crusher was better, but not by much.
yeah. See, a little Jimmy Neutron Wesley, but of course, how his story ends up is just kind of weird. He just goes off with I forget what he's called, but
It's the alien that has him and his species are somehow in tune with warp fields to such a point that they can transport through it without ships or something
yeah.
weird like that.
But then he shows up in let me think. It's
Nemesis.
Nemesis. Yeah, Nemesis.
Well, he was
Yeah,
only in like one scene.
yeah. He was in the wedding scene, I believe.
Yeah,
But for
and
some reason, he's wearing a uniform.
well,
Yeah,
the I don't know if it's an official explanation, a joke explanation, or a fan explanation. That's also a joke explanation. But apparently, because he thought it might have been a Betazoid wedding, where
yeah. So he showed
Betazoid
up
weddings
naked.
apparently
Yeah, I
have a
heard that one.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that theory. Which knowing Wesley, yeah, he would do that.
yeah. He's a bit of a dork on that side. But I
Oh yeah.
think when it concerns Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, in my view, was my favorite series. That
Oh
is.
yeah,
Yeah,
because you had character development for pretty much every character.
yeah,
Julian Bashir going from the awkward, overeager doctor to facing the demons of his past with the whole being genetically engineered
yeah,
to finally getting what was it, Esri Dax in the end.
yeah,
You had what was it? The very angry and justifiably so um, uh, Cisco go to this kind of cultural accepting this to get being given a cultural religious position he never wanted to completely accepting it.
that's true. And also in the first episode, of course, uh, he was working on recovering from the death of his wife.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
at the hands of Locutus of Borg.
yeah. I thought it was great how they tied that in as a plot element.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and of course you've got Gul Dukat.
Oh god, the thing is he stayed consistent, but he slipped away and that worked for him slowly. He basically was built up by his daughter and then slapped down when she was killed.
Yeah,
And slapped down hard.
yeah. He really went off the deep end on that one.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'd have to say that if I had to give Deep Space Nine one out of a 1 to 10 rating, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's very great. It's
Yeah.
certainly my favorite series. Of course, it has a few stinker episodes in it, as all shows do. But
Especially in the earlier seasons.
yeah,
Though the only episode with Q was quite fun.
yeah,
You
that one
hit me.
was yeah,
Picard never hit me. I'm not Picard.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe they ended up doing a lot more with Q on Voyager in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. They let him flesh himself out a little bit and actually grow.
yeah. Although I think that the way uh, in some sense, First Contact and later on Voyager handled the Borg sort of made them seem a bit weaker than they had originally been
Well,
portrayed.
well, yeah, but when they were originally portrayed, they were a true hive mind. But you could argue that because of them being that sort of hive mind, the fact that they were defeated by the Federation so handily with that first cube, the whole Locutus of Borg incident,
Yeah,
where they were able to hack into it, means that to survive long term, I think they changed because of that. But it's a theory to explain bad writing.
yeah.
Is what it was.
Another theory could be that if you look at what happened with Hugh, that maybe that affected the entire collective, and that it maybe had a brief breakdown or something, and then came back together.
Yeah.
That could be another theory because
Oh yeah.
originally, when you look at the Borg, they were just physically speaking uh, very strong, and then later
Oh yeah.
on they get beaten up a lot more easily. But I guess it all depends on what the writers want, really.
Yep.
Yep.
It's kind of the whole thing with the writers. I mean, look, Voyager had its problems. I would give it a solid 7 out of 10.
Yep.
And the thing is, you probably watched Enterprise, right? Even though it was a very flawed series.
I saw some parts of it.
Okay, there. Did you see season 3, the Zindi arc, as it's called?
I hear that that's considered by many to be the best season.
That was the season where it got its feet under it, and
Yeah.
season 4 was where it was hitting its stride. If it continued, it would have been a good series.
Yeah.
Just like, remember, seasons 1 and 2 of Next Generation were very shaky.
That's true.
And same thing with DS9, same thing with Voyager.
Yeah.
Hell, same thing with the original series.
Yeah. Although with the third season of the original series, because of some changes, there are some of the less good episodes in the third season.
Yeah. Basically, in the earlier era, the early series seasons of the series,
Yeah.
it they are clunkier trying to get their feet under them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
And it
but of
and
course, with, for example, the next generation, you have the opposite issue happening later on, uh, in the last couple
it
seasons,
got worn out.
where they knew how to do all the character interactions, but they sort of were starting to run out of ideas on the plots for
Yeah.
episodes. Yeah, so it was more carried by, in the early seasons, it was more carried by the sort of high concept
Yeah.
plot ideas, and in the later seasons by the chemistry between the actors
Yeah.
and the character writing.
Yeah. But the thing is, there still were moments that were bad.
Yeah, certainly.
But yeah, and it's one of those things that also one of the things that really put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth with Enterprise was the last episode. These Are the Voyages, I think was the name of it, where
Yeah.
it basically brought back some of the Next Generation cast. And I've actually heard of how they could make it better. One, don't kill Trip in the end.
Okay.
Have him near death
Near
is
death trip.
basically near death, and I've also heard that basically at that point have T'Pol have a bit of a emotional break.
Okay.
That was one of the ways. And the next one is instead of having it be during the Enterprise D era, have it when Riker is on the commanding the Titan, which would
That.
make it his age perfect because you can explain, oh, this is 10, 15 years
Yeah.
or ever many years after the Next Generation.
But instead they sort of retconned it into the middle of
Into the Pegasus, which was, though a decent episode, that these are the voyages. It doesn't make any sense because the only reason that what was it that Riker revealed the secret was because there was no other choice. Whereas in that one, it sounded like he was going to go to talk to the captain in his ready room or his bedroom or his cabin.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and also it's been said, don't make that a season finale. Make it like a mid-season episode as a nice little love letter to the fans. But the thing is, you could still keep a lot of that similar story.
Yeah.
Though I would say change it out a little bit. Don't do the jump into the future, just because the a lot of people hated Trip and T'Pol and thought it would be better if it was T'Pol Archer, but Archer has to stand alone, and he seemed a lot closer to Hoshi.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah. On my standpoint, what do you think about Battlestar Galactica?
I haven't seen enough of it to
Okay.
give an opinion. I've only seen bits of episodes. I
Okay.
think the ship designs are cool and some of the concept of it's cool, but I've never watched it. I've
Yeah.
also heard that it's very, very melodramatic.
Well, it depends, I guess, on which version you watch. I personally
Yeah.
prefer the original version.
I've heard that one is much less melodramatic.
Yeah, it's
Though
it
I'm going to throw a curveball at you for sci-fi shows. What are your thoughts on Farscape?
Farscape. I've read a little bit about it. I haven't seen it though. So
It is a
yeah,
very niche thing, but it's where the actor that played Mitchell and
yeah,
Claudia
I
Black
know.
came from. Yeah,
Yeah,
and there was a reference to it in the 200th episode of Stargate
yes,
SG-1.
I remember that one. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that was interesting.
yeah, with Thor as what's the name of that other character from Farscape?
The frog dude. That's all
Yeah,
I remember from that. It's been so long.
he's a puppet,
Yeah.
I
What about
think.
Babylon 5?
Oh man, I love Babylon 5.
I I've I haven't watched the last season. I've only watched bits of it. Well, the
Yeah,
beginning of it.
I think the last season is sort of winding things down because he's not in command of the
Yeah.
station anymore.
Yeah, he's the president of this kind of unit, this kind of
Yeah,
technically multicultural, very cosmopolitan, independent space station.
yeah, because they send I think it's Lockley to command the station,
Yeah.
and
And the second in command, because she lost the ranger guy, she fucks off and becomes a captain elsewhere.
yeah, Ivanova, yeah, and then
So
Ranger
yeah,
Marcus, yeah,
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 which really sucked.
yeah. That was a sad death.
Yeah,
Yeah, with the life stealing device.
life transferring
Yeah,
device. Yeah.
but I do have to say that I always thought that the themes of the show were very interesting. Uh,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's certainly well written.
Mhm.
So going into the realms of animated science fiction, um, is there something that stands out to you in particular?
Yeah, for what was that? Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Animated science fiction.
Um, I'm assuming we're including both Western and Eastern.
Yeah, you can have both.
When it comes to Western, there's not a ton that is out there that isn't that is really well known. Titan AE, that film, I enjoyed it, though it was very early 2000s.
Yeah, I heard about that one. Yeah, uh,
Though it did break with some tropes. You know, the guards weren't complete idiots. The bad guys could hit shit.
yeah. I loved Treasure Planet.
Oh yeah, that was a fun retelling. I enjoyed that. I know it's flawed, but it is
Yeah,
very enjoyable.
yeah. It is flawed, but I think it was very fun as a movie. Certainly
Oh
was.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's kind of, and I think it what was it? It follows basically just a slightly modified version of the original story.
Well, yeah. Of course, modified in some very science fictiony ways, but also
Oh yeah,
keeping this idea of a boat going in through space,
oh yeah,
which isn't at that point necessarily an original idea because it's already been done in let's say Space Battleship Yamato had a similar idea. Although maybe
Yeah, I watched the original, but not the what was it? Not the other. What was
not
it?
the 2199,
The yeah, no, sorry, not the I watched the remake, but not the
2199.
sequel. Yeah, twenty
Yeah,
one ninety nine. Not the but the other one that I'm watching a bit later wasn't the biggest fan of it. It seemed just a lot weaker as a series.
yeah, yeah. How about Legend of the Galactic Heroes? Have you heard of that one?
I The name sounds familiar, but I'm not super familiar with it myself. I've heard the name, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's very large in its scope, and it's also in some ways political as well. So I personally enjoyed it. It's actually my favorite anime. Uh,
Nice.
yeah,
Obviously, when it comes to sci-fi, in anime, you can't miss out on the big one, Gundam.
Gundam,
Though
definitely.
I've only watched a handful of series, I tried to watch Iron Blooded Orphans. I tried. I fucking couldn't. It
Yeah,
is so slow.
I haven't gotten around to that yet. I'm trying to watch them in order of release, so I'm
I've
starting
watched
way back.
I think it's the Double O series that had two seasons and a movie a while back. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Um, though I personally, when it comes to mecha, prefer the lesser known but interestingly decent Full Metal Panic. Though the second raid and the latest in the third season, the Invisible War or Invisible Victory, were superior to the first season by far.
Yeah.
The problem is they try to do an action mecha and a comedy at the same time, and it just didn't work in that first season. There was something called Fumofu, which is a companion season to season two. That is where all the comedy was excised to.
Hmm.
Though they still keep some of the lighthearted nature here and there as points of levity.
Yeah, I do have to say that I think the original Mobile Suit Gundam, in my opinion, is actually very, very good.
I've heard good things about it. Yeah,
Yeah, of course it is from several decades back, so uh, the animation is
it is very early
it well,
Japanese
it's
animation.
simpler in style, but I would say that it certainly gets the job done, and I like it. I personally anyway, but yeah, I think another one that's interesting with mech wise, you've got Dimensional Fortress, or actually Super Dimensional Fortress Macross.
I've heard of Macross, but I've never seen it. The
Yeah.
most I've seen, I think it's Macross. Isn't that the one where the mechs, but also there's the singing?
Uh, there's the singing, but the singing becomes more intertwined with the mechs later on in later seasons.
Got it. Because I basically there's this one little meme that I've got in my YouTube meme stash that
Yeah.
is what was it? I'm going to try to pull it up right now just so I can give you just its name and you'll know immediately what it's referencing. But it was Macross. Where is it? No, not that. And memes. There it is. Macross September Delta.
Yes, it's because the tune for some of the
Yeah.
songs from Macross Delta sound like other popular songs.
Oh yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Popular songs. There are certain combinations of. I'm not a music theorist at all. I'm just kind of noticed that a lot of popular songs, they follow certain patterns.
Yes, they do. I'm a composer, so I am in a sense familiar with that conceptually.
Yeah. I'm just guy with engineer's brain. I notice patterns.
Yeah. So yeah, with the original Macross, they don't do the singing in the mechs. What they do is
Yeah.
they do the singing as a form of culture shock because the
Yeah.
aliens don't know about it, so it confuses them.
Mm,
So
yeah.
they just broadcast it into
Oh,
space.
also based. I'm looking at this clip again. This looks like it's one of the earlier anime to start utilizing 3D animation for the mech scene.
Yeah, it can be hit or miss depending on how you do it.
Even the ones that have refined it, it's still hit and miss.
Yeah, of course, when you're talking about unpopular 3D animation, you can get into berserk areas.
Haven't seen it, so
Yeah,
can't really talk about it too much.
yeah. Well, anyway, people just hated how the 3D animation came out on that one, which
Yeah,
was a real shame because it's a very popular series.
it's one of those things that I've noticed it crop up, mainly in Japanese animation, but it's popped up a couple of times in Western animation, though pretty rarely. And if they don't do it, they've gotten to the point where it's hard to notice. But when you do see the mistake moment, you can see it constantly, and it just kills the magic.
Yeah,
But I
because
understand why, because animating mechs is hard.
yeah, and they don't have a Pixar budget as well
Yeah,
to do that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the thing is, I'll say this: when it comes to 3D animation, just when you full 3D animation, not 2D 3D hybrid, the West has got it down pat.
Hmm.
Japanese 3D animation, I think, is not that good. Its art style is not that good. It's very jarring because basically what they're trying to do is adapt their 2D style to 3D. Whereas in Western, they somewhat took some cues from 2D animation, but they made their own style.
Yeah, they have sort of if you look at the character designs of, let's say, Pixar characters, they have
Yeah,
shapes, three-dimensional shapes in mind when they design the characters from the start,
yeah,
rather
yeah,
than thinking about how would this look as a painting. uh,
yeah.
so
Whereas Japanese 3D animation, it's trying to emulate the 2D style as much as possible,
yeah,
and it is just jarring.
because a lot of
Like there was
times it's an
Arpeggio Blue Steel is one of the worst examples.
yeah,
I have to say, I tried to watch it. The art style killed it for me
yeah,
because the character they try to do the crazy facial expressions,
yeah.
and it just is so jarring.
Oh yeah, if you try to do one of those in 3D, that's just doesn't
It's
work.
game over.
Yeah,
Game over. Game set
yeah,
match.
yeah. I've worked on MMD, so I know that getting the facial expressions down can sometimes be kind of hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I will say that what is your position on, let's say, support for Israel?
They have a right to exist. They are the closest we have to anyone we even remotely trust in that region. So I think we should be friendly, but we shouldn't directly support them.
Okay, but that's actually a very interesting springboard for a philosophical question. What gives them the right to exist?
The main reason why I believe they have the right to exist is you actually can genetically trace their ancestry to that region. And they do have a history of being in that region. We know this. We've proven this beyond a reasonable doubt, as well as they also have succeeded in what I call the right of conquest.
Okay,
They set up, they were attacked, they won and gained more territory, which means under the rules of war, they've won.
that's right. Uti possidesis, as it would be called in international law. So I would agree on the second point very much that because they now have established their authority and their jurisdiction in that land, that it is now their land, functionally
Yeah.
speaking.
And people can
Yeah,
have a historical claim to a region. I do believe that.
I
People do have a right to have a historical claim, but the question is the person who holds it. The person who holds it has the right to choose if they want to recognize it or not. At the
yeah,
time, that region was being held by the British and the French, and well, mainly the British. And they decided, yes, we are going to give this land to these people.
yeah. I
And
personally am more opposed to the idea of ancestral claims.
and at the same time, you know that the quote unquote holy region, which we're both men that kneel at the cross.
Yeah,
Would you rather it be in the hands of Israel to control the Holy Land, or the Muslims?
Well, it's not really that important to me who controls that particular part of land because I don't do pilgrimages or anything like that. So
I want somebody who will actually respect and preserve the history. You know what happens when Islam comes into regions that have different historical religions and what they do to those historic sites. They
that
destroy
is
them.
true. That
The
there
Israelis at
certainly
least
is a
respect and
tendency.
protect them.
Yeah,
The Israelis won't burn down and destroy historical churches. They'll just leave them alone for
yeah.
the most part.
Well, one thing that I do take issue with is that I believe they have banned the material proselytizing. So you can't go out and, let's say, pass out Bibles or uh, give people pamphlets and things like that.
But as a nation, they have a right to do that.
They, as
As
a
a
nation, have the ability to make laws to do that.
Yeah,
But I think that from a religious perspective, I follow a higher law in that sense.
yeah, oh yeah. There are higher laws, but the thing is, remember, we're dealing with the laws of men, not the laws of God.
Yeah.
Here. And look, I don't want to get into the whole argument of are the Jews this great evil that has screwed over the Europeans for all of time and doing it today, or are they a great victim? I think it's probably somewhere in between. It's hard to say. There have been people within the community that have caused problems. Look at George Soros, for God's sake.
Yeah, but my personal position on the Jews is that, in my view, the Jews are pretty much like anyone else. So
They have their tribe, and technically, it is a tribe of various tribes. Because the thing is, there are different groups within the Jewish community, quote
yeah,
unquote.
or
The ones that
I'm a German, for example, and there's different kinds of Germans. You've got
Yep,
the Alemanni, you've got the Bavarians, you've got the
the
Saxons.
Prussians,
Uh,
the
well,
Prussians.
Prussians are pretty much Saxons, tribally speaking, that is. But yeah, there's different tribes in Germany. So
Yeah,
yeah, but I don't
yeah,
think that that's something that I would say is particularly important for me politically speaking. I think it's more
yeah,
important to establish the authority of a state uh, in a sense of a jurisdiction state rather than an ethno
yeah.
state.
You're a civnat, not an ethnonat.
Um,
Civic nationalist.
actually, I wouldn't really characterize it as nationalism, at least not in the modern usage of the term. So I would say that instead of a nation states, I prefer uh, jurisdiction states because a nation has in itself an implication of nativity and popular cohesion, while I personally prefer the idea of jurisdiction and territorial cohesion.
Yeah, but the problem is, I look at those systems and I don't see them lasting long because there isn't a coherent nation or culture. The thing that keeps a nation or jurisdiction or whatever together is several pillars. One of them is sense of community. One of them is the sense of family. One of them is the sense of law and order. And I would argue one of the pillars is also a sense of faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it really depends on how the state is structured, whether the state leans on certain elements. Uh, because ideally, you would want to create a state that can prevent its own institutions from having problems, while also being able to solve problems externally from its institutions in a broader society. So, in that sense, I view attempting to make unity of culture as something that is very difficult and something that is counter to uh, expansionist interests, which I think, in my view, are somewhat legitimate in certain circumstances.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I'm a little weird, and I'm somebody I prefer to be an isolationist, but there are times when I go and put on my rimmed glasses and sorry, go with my wire rimmed glasses, put on a big old mustache, and go Teddy Roosevelt Monroe doctrine.
Yeah, because let's say the Roman Empire, in my view, is a great example of a very multi uh, polar, multi ethnic state that
But arguably the Roman Empire was more of the central Roman states and then their vassal states,
that
which
is
were
true
semi-independent.
in the sense that and that semi independence, in my view, is something that helped the empire last so long. Because if
Yeah,
they had tried to fully integrate everything, I don't think it would have
yeah.
lasted because it would have caused huge amounts of strife.
Oh yeah, I'm not a fan of forced. I'm not a fan of expansion and then forced integration. If you're immigrating to some place, your duty as an immigrant is to integrate. Of
Hmm.
course, if you're moving somewhere else, your job is to be more like the nation you're going to.
I have a viewpoint of communities in the sense that I want to decentralize social and economic policies to communities so that the communities can establish that kind of regulation, so that if somebody wants to immigrate, that person needs to have a community that is willing to welcome that
Yeah,
person. So in that sense, the communities can maintain their own integrity by choosing not to allow people in that they believe would be damaging to their communities.
yeah. But the thing is, there is the concept of the greater American community. There, for this system to work, there has to be a certain amount of shared core values.
I don't think that's actually necessary.
You know, at the end of the day, I am somewhat of a monoculturalist. I believe that there should be one core culture that the nation does adhere to and follow. That there can be many subcultures within it, but they all still are part of the main culture.
Yeah, in my view, I see that as something that is very difficult to achieve, and something
And yet we see it in nations all over the world. Look at
I
Japan; they are monocultural
I don't
and they
think
are
they are
stable.
actually. I
There are
if you
certain
look
core
deep down,
values to being Japanese.
but what you can see is that there's many individuals who have very different values even within those societies.
Yes, but the core values still remain. We're talking about the ancillary and tertiary values.
Yeah.
Whereas someone who was raised in a city would value a hard day's work being in an office building. Someone out in the country would be hard day's work on the farm.
Yeah. But most countries, in my view, at least from living in multiple countries, there is a sort of diversity of values within countries that I
Oh yeah,
can see
that
is very distinct.
yeah.
For example, northern Italy and southern Italy are very different places. Northern Germany and southern Germany are very different places. Northern England and southern England are very different
Oh yeah.
places. So
But yet there still are similarities between them, and that's what binds them together.
I don't think it's the similarities that bind them together so much as it is the fact that they're under a common government. Because I think the threat of violence that the state controls is something that's very powerful, uh, that in some ways produces a, at one point, a common peace, and at another point, a solidarity.
I could see how it is. I think that at the end of the day, I think we'll be kind of an agree to disagree on this. because
Yeah.
we each have our own core values with how we wish to see society move
Yeah.
forward.
Well, what I say is that obviously there are some values that are better than other values. And
Right.
I think that the way that people will realize this is if they are allowed in some way to apply their values in their lives and live honestly with their values. And then what you will see is a competition of values. And what then happens is that superior values will become more common and inferior values will become less common.
And in the end, you would get to my system.
Yes. However, instead of coming at it from the front, assuming that your end would look a certain way, my view instead assumes a sort of informed ignorance in the sense that we don't necessarily know exactly what the better cultures are, but we're willing to, in
But
some
one
way,
of the risks
experiment
that
to
your
find out.
system, but one of the risks that your systems has is an outside force taking over, because you're dealing with fragmented cultures
I don't think.
that are unlikely to come to the other's defense
Well,
because of
that's
the
that's what the
difference.
state is for. It's not as if I'm talking about individual city states. I'm talking
Yeah,
about a large state that has significant amounts of power in certain areas.
yeah.
That
But the problem is with that risk is, look, I'm not a big fan of the big central authority. I prefer the power come from the people, and if the people have certain core values, you don't need a powerful state to keep everyone in line. You have the society itself, the pressure from your fellow citizen that keeps you in line.
well, I don't think that the pressure of fellow citizens can win external wars, though.
But the thing is, no, what I'm talking about is your system to keep everyone from stabbing each other and having, and having wars is the threat of violence from a powerful state.
Yes.
And the problem is that system puts way too much power in the hands of too few, and that is too easy to corrupt. Whereas where I come from, you have a weaker central authority, but what keeps it together is a common culture, common set of values. And when the system becomes threatened, the people rise up together
Well,
to form the army needed to defend
I
itself.
don't think you're. I think you may have misunderstood something that I said. Uh, when I say that my state is powerful, I don't mean that the power is fully concentrated 100% into the central state, but rather what I mean is that
A confederation of states.
uh, I prefer a more a delegation of states in the sense that there is in my system to be more specific on the on my political ideology, it is democratic in the sense that people vote for their leaders and then those leaders get together and vote for the leaders above them, essentially in my view solving the problem of having too large a
Oh,
pool of
so
voters.
so how we did the Senate back in the day before the 17th Amendment
Yes, except
or the
in my
20th.
case, it's more flexible because it allows for an infinite size of a state if necessary. Because it naturally and organically can create new levels above itself as necessary and can expand sideways as well.
Interesting concepts. I mean, my system is basically what we have with the U.S. a representative republic with a House and a Senate, but the House, I get the House back to its original purpose, which is the crazier, closest to the people branch of the federal government. Then the Senate is elected by the state senators and confirmed by the governor. But I would put a caveat to keep the state government from not listening to the people. The people have a right of a recall election. So if the people don't like the senator that was chosen by the state senate and the governor, they can recall him, and that individual can no longer be a senator.
Yeah.
So basically, the people have the power of veto. And then I would, from there, I would then modify the electoral college. I would still keep it, because it gives us a plurality of opinion. It gives us a plurality rather than a majority. A plurality is better than a majority because plurality is less likely to stamp on the rights of the minority.
Okay. What I would do is I would eliminate national elections altogether and only have local elections, and then have a sort of a pyramid of elections going up each level, uh, in order
Though
to.
there is one flaw with that.
Yeah.
That gives equal power to a very small community and a very large community.
Well, I think. Yeah.
Or you have to do the or you have to do the reverse, where the large community has more power than the small community, and both problems have systems. Whereas my system doesn't have that because both are addressed. It's a compromise.
Yeah.
Each state has equal number of senators, but not all states have equal numbers of representatives. And I didn't get to the last bit, which was the what was it the electoral college. What I would do is the popular vote of the state gives two electoral votes representing the two senators. So whatever the majority of the state chooses, those two votes go that way. But then each congressional district will go to the popular vote within them. So, for example, that means a certain amount of votes in California would go to the Republicans rather than all of the votes going to the Democrats.
Yeah.
It also means that Republican states would have votes going to Democrats. It means that it would force the national level campaign to campaign everywhere and get a plurality of opinion.
Hmm. My system would essentially eliminate political campaigns altogether, pretty much. Because if the people can only vote for their immediate political superiors, etc., then campaigning is mostly based on interpersonal relationships rather than trying to get strangers
Yeah,
on
that
your side
that
of
that
issues.
system does limit the amount of corruption, but the problem is, I see that system is as incapable at a certain point of getting anything done.
In what sense?
Because as you start moving up, you start getting groups that are in complete conflict with each other, having to vote on who's going to lead them.
Yes.
And when you get to that point, that means the system can no longer grow. I think it would only take maybe one or two jumps before you get to that.
Well, I see it in a different sense, in that the local leaders are individuals that are trusted by the people for their leadership abilities. And those, in my view, would be the best qualified to then choose individuals above them who they trust, therefore creating a sort of a refinement. So, in my view, the higher you get up, the less problems are likely to occur.
I just see that system would be way too unstable as you go up into the system, because you're going to start getting people that are completely opposed to each other in every aspect, having to vote on who's going to lead them when the system gets big enough.
Well, why would you get them to be completely opposed to each other?
It's because as you break down, because there's no common culture. There's nothing they can. That means you can have somebody from. The best way to put this would be you have a progressive from California
Yeah.
and a traditional conservative from the deep south having to vote on who's going to lead them.
Hmm.
They have two completely different ideas about what a good leader is because they don't share cultural values at all.
Yeah. But what's important to note is that they're not asking individuals to lead them in social policy or economic policy, but rather in issues of uh, military and diplomacy and things like that.
And those all are downstream from cultural values.
Exactly. But I think, in my view, it's better than trying to uh, force individuals to have a common culture, as that would cause a civil war.
I don't see a civil war happening in Japan or South Korea. Those nations are fairly culturally stable, though they have other issues. Whereas if you look at nations that are heavy multicultural, those are the ones that are likely to have civil wars. I mean, look at us right now in the US. Some say we're on the brink of that, we're pretty close to being on the brink.
I personally don't think that the U.S. is on the brink of a civil war because at the current point there's not enough advantage for people to actually go to war.
It doesn't matter about advantage. I mean, the side that I think likely to do it is the those with Trump derangement syndrome. The impeachment inquiry is coming apart at the seams right now.
Yeah.
It was just revealed that Joe Biden, that Hunter Biden was pretty much only brought onto that company in Ukraine because of who his father was, and that that company reached out and name dropped Hunter Biden to State Department officials to get that investigation squashed. And there's a lot of extremely crazy shit happening around that. And at the same time, the people claiming that, oh, there was quid pro quo, say they heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy who heard it from another guy.
Yeah.
And there's an entire side that believes that that is completely legitimate and fine, and the other side, which I would argue is the side on this that sees realities going like, this is fucking bullshit, you need to stop this. That one side is completely divorced itself from reality. And when you divorce yourself from reality, you will start thinking you have an advantage when you actually don't. I mean, God, imagine what's going to happen when Trump is likely to win 2020. What do you think is going to happen in certain left wing areas? Do you think they're just going to peacefully accept it, or do you think they're going to riot?
Yes, there are certainly the Antifa types are very likely to be very upset. But there's a difference, of course, between a riot and an all-out civil war.
If they feel that if social alienation gets high enough and they feel there's no other option left, I mean, they're literally talking that Trump is a dictator that's taken over America and is going to, gas minorities and enslave women. They are completely divorced from reality. They think they're the GIs storming the beaches of Normandy, for God's sake.
Yes, there certainly are a lot of people saying that. Yet I don't think that currently there's enough people that are actually militant at this point anyway.
At this point, but they're starting to spread. You remember the guy that tried to firebomb an ice facility and he got taken out pretty quick by the guards?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're spreading. They're right now actively spreading his manifesto around Antifa groups.
yeah.
Look, we're looking at early stage. I wouldn't. Okay, Weimar Germany. I don't like using the comparison too much, just because the U.S. doesn't have the Weimar Germany problems. We're not in economic turmoil right now. We are actually economically doing very well.
Yes, of course we are. We're the
Yeah,
biggest
yeah,
economy in the world.
yeah. But there are certain things that there are parallels. One, Antifa basically are the communists. They
Yeah,
are allowed to run a roughshod in cities. And one of the things that was a problem in Weimar Germany was the communists basically took over cities.
yes,
And
that
they
did
had to send
happen.
the Freikorps in to put them down because the police weren't effective. The police are currently standing down. How long before we start seeing Freikorps form in the US?
Yeah, I would also say, well, if you're talking about Freikorps, the specific context of that forming was from World War I veterans.
Yes, I know that they. But I'm using Freikorps in the general sense of a
Yeah.
paramilitary militia forming
Well,
to take back control and restore law and order when the government is incapable or unwilling to do
yeah.
so.
I don't think we have any major individuals currently doing that. However,
Yeah,
we do have, for example, in Portland, you've got the what are they called again? They're with Gavin McInnes.
Mhm. Oh, the Proud Boys.
Yeah, the Proud Boys. They were confronting Antifa in the street, but and of course there was an incident recently where some of them did indeed get convicted uh, for
Yeah, and they're
some
going to
violence
jail for a
there.
couple of years. But the thing is, that group was actually out looking for it and may have been the initiators.
Yeah,
But the problem is, no one from Antifa who also were guilty were arrested. None of them. And Antifa uses very, very scary tactics to prevent their guys from getting arrested.
yeah.
Sure, there's been a couple here and there, but only after extreme outrage at local police for letting it happen. God forbid one of these Antifa fucks goes suicide bomber and detonates himself in the middle of a right wing rally. What do you think will happen when that day comes?
There'll certainly be calls for blood. Certainly.
There will be calls for blood, and because the police were allowed to let it go on for so long, vigilante justice might be, unfortunately, the only answer because the police may be unwilling or unable to stop it.
See, that's why the police definitely needs to get on the ball on this.
Either the police need to get on the ball or Trump needs to nationalize the National Guards in some of these states and send them in. Bypass the left wing governors entirely and just send these guys in to arrest the entire crowd and charge all of them with accessory and conspiracy to commit crimes.
Yeah. Well, accessory perhaps, conspiracy perhaps when it's provable.
You're dressing up in the same way as everyone else to in a clear way to prevent the police from being able to identify those that commit crimes. That is conspiracy to that's conspiracy.
Well, I would say
Combine that with the
it's
shit that
accessory, but conspiracy is a
yeah.
form of speech.
Look, I just remember what was it about a year or so back, maybe 2 years back, when Crowder and Not Gay Jared infiltrated the Antifa guys and they were giving them fucking tasers and knives, and the media refused to talk about it. How do you think that's an isolated incident, or do you think they're doing that more than that? Do you think they're if they're willing to plan that level? What do you want to bet they're telling people do this so you don't, so that our
I'm not
brothers, our
saying that they
Antifa brothers and
aren't
sisters
doing
don't
it.
get?
I'm
Yeah,
just saying
yeah,
that it's better to accuse things with things that are fully provable, rather than assuming that there's a conspiracy on every single part. That's
look,
all I'm saying. I'm not saying that they aren't
yeah,
conspiring. I'm just saying that it might be hard to prove in certain cases.
look. I know it's hard to prove, but it's something that we've got to crack this nut
Yeah,
before
I
it
certainly think
causes more damage.
that they should be arrested at least, and if they resist, that force uh, is justified, especially if they start destroying property. At that
Oh
point,
yeah,
I say
they have
definitely,
violated the NAP at that point.
yeah, yeah, essentially. Although my viewpoint is not necessarily on the nap as much as it is the that they're subduing the authority of, let's say, the common peace. The
Yeah,
Yeah. So in that sense, I think it's very important for the police to enforce its actual jurisdiction, because otherwise that's why you end up getting uh, rackets of various kinds coming together. It's when the police is in some way deficient in their enforcement, and sometimes
yeah,
people
and
take
you've
the
seen
law
how
into their
pissed
own
these cops.
hands.
Yeah, you've seen how pissed these cops have been getting. You've
Yeah,
seen the videos of them saying, "Well, you better talk to the mayor about this one." I mean, what was it? It's not really Antifa that's a problem in New York, but do you know what was it? De Blasio is the most hated mayor by the cops in like I think in New York City history. The cops hate him
yeah,
because of all the shit he's pulling, and the city's getting unsafe because of it.
yeah. In a similar way, you also have the Sharia courts forming in Western countries. And the reason why that happens is because in Islam there's various types of fiqh or jurisprudence,
Yeah.
and what they see is a gap that they perceive in law enforcement. That there's something that they view necessarily has to be enforced, but which the U.S. As a more free country does not enforce. So they try to enforce that. So it essentially is an incompatibility in that sense.
Yeah. It's an incompatibility that effectively makes them arguably ineligible to come to this nation.
Potentially, of course, there's different viewpoints on fiqh and on enforcing various types of laws.
And
But
yet, the more stringent ones seem to be the ones that always win.
yeah, they
Funny
certainly
that.
seem to be more common. But yeah, it's always heating up, and I wouldn't say that this exact situation is particularly unique, as you mentioned Germany. Now, of course,
Yeah.
in Germany, you also had the political conflict that was happening at the upper levels,
Oh, yeah.
where you had people like von Papen and others who were in a sort of a leadership struggle, and then tried to
Yeah.
use the Nazis as a sort of a third party support that they could wield in order to gain power. But ultimately, they didn't happen.
It's very interesting to study. But the thing is, we're not likely to fall to a communist or what was it, communist or fascist government anytime soon.
Yeah, certainly not. Well,
Could,
the Nazis
could
aren't
be
fascist, but I see what you're saying.
they're not fascist. I thought they were fascist.
No, they're not.
They're national. Well, they were authoritarian socialists. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, but I like to define fascism very specifically in
Got it.
regards to,
We'll,
let's
we'll
say,
go with their proper name, National Socialist.
yeah, yeah, because they didn't, for example, have the same syndicalist ideas that the fascists had.
Yeah. But
But
look, at the end of the day, not a good system.
yeah, I would agree that it's not a good system. I would say that probably the medieval feudal system is probably better than any socialist system. At
And that
least,
one had a lot of problems.
well, it survived for many centuries, and
It survived, but it survived by crushing the freedoms of people beneath it. That was the
yeah,
cost. That people were basically slaves. That the vast majority of the population were some form of slave.
well, yeah. What you had is at the time of Diocletian and Constantine in the Roman Empire, you had some tax reforms that made it more convenient for people to essentially fall under a form of patronage rather than operate independently. So and that's where the medieval serfdom comes from in large part.
Yeah.
But
And well,
yeah,
also not only that, the Japanese developed their own system that was fairly similar,
yeah, in
and
certain
it and it
aspects.
and it lasted until the West kind of kicked their door down. And that's when there was the Meiji Reformation, which changed everything in Japan and made them, I would argue, on par with some of the European colonial powers.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what they were aiming for. Uh,
Well, they did kick the shit out of Russia
yep.
and did some pretty serious damage to China. It's just they bit off more than they could chew in the end.
Yeah. Uh, Ultimately, they didn't have the oil in the end to make it through.
They didn't have the oil or the production capabilities. They did not have the ability to produce enough ships. Let's say magically there was a machine that could produce all the oil the Japanese needed. They still wouldn't have been able to stop the American fleets. It just would have been a more costly war of attrition.
Yeah, they would have lasted longer, but
Yeah,
ultimately they would have lost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what the Japanese would have needed would have been oil and steel. Because manpower, the Japanese were fanatics. They had plenty of manpower.
certainly. Yeah, they even had school children participating in the making of paper balloons, which they used to lift bombs and float them over the Pacific.
Yeah,
And ultimately, they did manage to get at least one fatality from that, but it was
it
covered up for
was.
morale reasons.
Well, also that one fatality was somebody fucking with the damn thing. The guy was pulling on ropes on it, so he kind of earned that Darwin Award.
Well, yeah, just imagine you're in North America and you just see this weird thing that's that's there. You never expected to see it, but there it is. That's what happens.
Yep. It's interesting to kind of look at what would happen if certain variables are changed in history. What I think would have changed history significantly, that
Yeah.
would be very fascinating, would have been if the U.S. sided with Germany in World War One rather than with the British, French, and technically the Russians, but the Russians
Okay.
were out by that point.
Okay.
That would have been an interesting alternate history.
But the question is, why would they have sided with Germany?
There are it is very loose, but one of the reasons why is there was a massive German population in the U.S. and there still was the minority at the time a resentment for the British for various reasons. And
Yeah.
there were incidents that could have easily caused a flare up with between the British and the Americans.
Yeah. Well,
I'm saying that there would have been a series of events that would have been had to been different, but there wouldn't have been massive changes in history.
yeah. Now, of course, Germany on its dream team for alliances, uh, they were always looking for, and even today, you could argue that they always like allying with Russia. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, because today what you have is Germany is dependent on Russia in natural gas. There's a pipeline that goes directly
Oh yeah.
uh, to Germany.
Yeah, and right now I think the U.S. is trying to convince Europe to basically set up infrastructure on the coastlines to accept liquefied natural gas, and the U.S. could ship it to them over the
Yeah,
sea. The cost would increase slightly, but it would also remove their dependence on Russian supply.
yeah. Because if let's say a war happened, which at the current time isn't very likely, but if
It is extremely unlikely.
yeah
Russia Russia would only go to war if they felt they had no other option. They like just to be the big bull. They like to be the big fish in their relatively geopolitically small pond.
yeah and of course the U.S. is in some ways trying to encircle Russia as well.
Which we agreed with as part of the whole reform away from the Soviet Union thing. We wouldn't do, and yet we're doing it. We need to stop that shit.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think that what ended up happening in Syria definitely did not have as happy an ending as the U.S. were hoping.
Yeah, no, we should have never gotten involved in that one.
Yeah. And of course, now there's a whole issue with Turkey. And of course, the U.S. isn't going to do anything about Turkey because Turkey is very important to the U.S. as an ally in the region.
Yeah, but sanctions can get them brought to heel.
Yeah.
Though I'm not exactly losing any sleep because the thing that the media isn't reporting, the Kurds were using our boys as human shields. They would run across the border into Turkey, commit terrorist attacks, and then run back and hide behind our boys.
Yep.
And you know what? And the thing is, we told the Kurds, cut that shit out. You're fucking with one of our allies. The Kurds said, "Oh, we'll talk to the guys causing the problem," and then next day we would do it again. So the Kurds betrayed us before we betrayed them.
Yeah. At the same time, you've got that whole operation out of Benghazi that happened years back
Yeah.
with gun running and everything. But yeah, ultimately, the U.S. needs to, in my opinion, be a bit more honest and upfront about its foreign policy.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, in the
America
sense
first.
of
America first. We're gonna
uh,
do what we can to make our nation better.
if we want to have a long term engagement with some other country, we need to be very upfront about it rather than simply saying, "Oh, we need to solve this particular problem, this other particular problem." Because let's be honest, Russia knows what the U.S. is doing. It's not as if they need
Yeah, it's what
to
Russia was
hide.
doing when they were. It's what the Russians were doing when they were the Soviet Union,
Yeah,
and we were doing.
and,
It was.
and,
It's
and
the
what's
great. It's the great
yeah,
chessboard.
and what's Russia's doing now with helping Iran and the Syrian government. So everybody's got a finger in the pie, and everybody knows what's going on. So why
And at
not
the end of the
just
day, I would much
yeah,
prefer we keep our eye on China.
yeah, just stop pretending. You know, get some Duterte memes with Rodrigo Duterte, who was criticizing the U.S. heavily until suddenly he's now asking the U.S. to go to war with China over islands in the South China Sea. So
Which nation does he lead?
the Philippines.
Yeah,
He's the one
yeah.
that gave free license for people to kill drug users
That was drug dealers.
and drug users.
Oh wow. Well, that's one way to deal with addiction.
Yeah, I bet people were scrambling to hide their drugs, but at the same time, there are some people that probably just killed people and then planted
Oh
the
yeah.
evidence afterwards.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which isn't something that's limited to the Philippines. That stuff happens everywhere.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
You show me a country, I'll show you them doing shit like this at one point in their history.
yeah, or even today. I mean, there's some policemen in the U.S. that are
Oh
corrupt.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
so I wouldn't
No.
say that the whole thing is corrupt as the Black Lives Matter say that it is, but I would say that certainly there we do need to always examine the police and make sure there's a high standard. So, what's your view on environmental issues? Uh,
My thing is the world is going to be caught on fire. It's very unlikely that that's the case, based on the amounts of CO2 that we produce, the fact that plants will consume more CO2 if there's more CO2 available,
yeah,
means that,
that's
and
global
the fact,
greening.
yeah, that's global warming, and the fact that we're seeing record levels of ice in the Antarctic, though the Arctic is seeing lower amounts than we should see. It's hard to say which one is which because they're keeping those stats very close to the vest. All they say is record levels of ice in the Antarctic and Arctic is just low.
Yeah, and
So
who's
it's
to
hard. Yeah.
say which levels of ice are ideal anyway? Because
Also, the
yeah,
thing is the whole. Well, we have an accurate history of temperature of the planet. Well, you guys recently. Well, it was recently revealed the method they were using unreliable.
that's true. And people say an accurate history, but there's many of these places in the world that they haven't started measuring since the 90s.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
so
also the thing is, the only way we can really take the Earth's temperature is via satellites from orbit. And how long have we had those satellites that can take accurate measurements?
not a long
Maybe
time.
50 years. Maybe 50 years. So we
No,
got
not
50
not
years
even
of
that.
data.
50
Yeah.
years ago, people weren't making satellites
Yeah.
to show that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Uh,
And not only that, but the thing is, the temperature that we can say is fairly accurate. Guess what? It matches more closely than CO2 levels. Almost perfectly matches it. In fact,
uh,
solar activity. The graphs are almost identical.
that could indicate. Well, it is true that, of course, the greater of a magnitude of light that the sun emits, that there's a
Yeah.
greater amount of energy that hits the Earth.
Exactly.
So
And the problem is the more CO2 you have in an atmosphere, the less effective it becomes at holding heat. I think it's like the first 100 parts or whatever. It's a very small amount. And we're like is like 90% of the heating. you get from
Yeah.
it.
I,
It's
I heard I
ridiculous.
heard one scientist say that with the satellites, what they don't take into account is that as the temperature changes, the actual shape of the atmosphere changes as well because of
Oh yeah,
expanding and contracting gases.
thermal expansion.
And because of that, it actually skews the readings on the satellites.
And thus and ground stations don't take temperature everywhere, and there's questions about how accurate they are because a lot of them that were originally set up years ago were fairly isolated, but now they're closer to cities where there's heat pollution.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of similar to how people like saying, "Oh, look at how IQ has changed in the past 200 years," when we haven't had our current methodology for measuring IQ until the 90s.
Yeah,
So
and then the
people,
numbers
yeah.
are still remaining fairly stable
Well, it
across the
depends.
board.
Some countries they actually change significantly,
Yeah,
especially third world countries where, let's say,
but
suddenly
those had
people are more
very limited
educated.
data.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the
So
thing is also at the same time, the U.S. Army for 100 years has tried to find ways to get people to increase IQ through training and education and other crazy ideas. None of them have worked. If they did, the U.S. Army would be using it so they can get more recruits that start out lower intelligence.
yeah.
Because
Well,
there is
yeah.
there is a floor. It's 82.
Yep.
82 has been the floor the entire time. If you're below 82 IQ, you cannot effectively be a soldier.
Yeah. And of course there's of course different metrics to IQ where certain individuals might be more proficient in one area than they are in other areas.
Exactly. Yeah. For example, what was it? The Asians are very good with the more certain engineering things, like I think it's spatial awareness and a few other things. But they're not so good in the more ones that we can more creative thinking that we can measure. I can't remember what the metrics called. As well as linguistic abilities. Whereas Ashkenazi Jews, they score off the charts when it comes to linguistic ability.
Yeah.
Yet score fairly poorly on spatial awareness is why you don't have a lot of Ashkenazi Jewish engineers. And
Yeah.
then you have whites and Europeans kind of being in between the two. And guess where a lot of historic innovation has been from?
The Europeans pretty
Yeah,
much. Now, of course, there's also
effectively,
been
yeah,
China at some
yeah.
point, but yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah. But the thing is, they kind of hit a point and stopped for a long time, and only recently they've been kind of copying and doing minor improvements to Western innovation.
yeah. And I think what
Though the
happens
Japanese have made strides, they've taken concepts from the West and just gone to town on them. It's kind of terrifying.
what happens is people also forget that all of these IQs are on curves. So
Yeah,
obviously, while on average certain
yeah, oh
individuals
yeah.
might be lower, a certain
Well,
individual
remember,
might be higher.
if
So
I remember right,
yeah,
Einstein was Ashkenazi Jew, or he was one of the Jewish ethnicities that's similar to it, and yet very poor literary wise, but extremely brilliant in the mathematical and physics.
yeah,
Yeah, obviously, and again, also you've got guys like though I'm not a fan of his tactics. I do think that he is definitely an intelligent guy when it comes to physics. Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is a very smart guy
okay.
when it comes to
When you say
physics.
tactics, what are you talking about?
He's been caught several times claiming that quotes that never existed to try to beat down people that are religious.
Quote for example.
He once quoted Bush, saying that Bush said, "Our God will beat your God," in reference to the Middle East. And he said it happened in a speech at the White House. Thing is, the White House got back and said there was never a speech of that sort. We've checked all of them.
Well,
None of them referenced that. But to this day, was it to this day, DeGrasse Tyson claims it's real.
Well, to be fair, I personally, as a religious person, don't really care what Bush has to say anyway.
Exactly, but the
In
thing
that
is,
standpoint,
the thing is, he tries to paint all Christians with that broad brush.
yeah, that is a problem.
As well as same thing with though I think he's clever and probably and he is an engineer, so he's decently intelligent. What was it? Bill Nye. I
Bill
think he's
Nye.
decently intelligent. He's
Yeah,
an engineer. He has to
yeah.
be decently intelligent. But you've seen his tactics.
Uh, I
He
actually haven't
he
watched that much of Bill Nye, to be fair.
he basically uses fear mongering tactics, as well as he actually released tweets saying that it should be a crime to deny climate change. That if you're a climate change denialist, you should be in jail.
Yeah, that's going a bit
Yeah,
far
yeah, exactly. These guys, they're smart when it
because
comes to
that's
their
not a
field,
scientific
but that's
attitude.
not. No,
Because
that's not. And consensus is not a scientific attitude.
yeah, because things
Repeatability of
people
experimentation
change things
is.
all the time. A great example is, of course, the models people have for the atom.
Yeah,
People used to believe that it was just a bunch of negative things in a sort of a positive pudding, the plum pudding model,
yeah,
and then eventually you've get the Bohr model, and now you've got the quantum model where you've got the quantum numbers, you've got your
yeah,
azimuth, your principal quantum number, etc. So
yeah. Exactly, yeah. And the thing is, science is not based on consensus.
yeah,
Consensus got us the four humors, for God's sake.
exactly. Consensus is
And the
what
quote
what
unquote
got us to
consensus they
shut up
point to is
Galileo. Uh,
yeah, and also consensus. The consensus that they point to, 92% of things that say it actually, if you actually look at the thing, is one, the study is not done by scientists. It was done by a journalist who has refused to release his methodology. Multiple scientists who had their papers cited as saying said, no, I never said such a thing that you're claiming I said. They've actually refuted, the scientists who made it refuted it. The
yeah,
92%, the best guess we've gotten is 92% of papers in the end say that we have an effect on the environment.
yeah, and that's true.
Yeah. And the
If
thing is, when it
you
comes to
yeah
environmentalism, I'm more of like a Teddy Roosevelt style conservationist. It's obvious we do devastating damage at a local and regional level. We can prove that easy. That
yeah
is not that hard. Smog, and I would love to see advancements in technology. But this whole we must ban air travel and cow farts is not helping.
yeah, people dropping trash on the side of a road. Maybe they should get a little slap on the wrist for that.
Yeah, but
A little
but
cut on the wrist, perhaps.
yeah, but demanding that people give up all car travel, start eating bugs, and consider cannibalism. No,
Yeah, that's
you,
going a bit silly. I mean,
yeah.
if you want to sell people on eating bugs, that fine by me. But saying that we have to do it or we'll die, that's not realistic.
Have to do it or we'll kill the planet.
Yeah,
Look, if you want to start resolving the problem, one, the West needs to completely shut down all immigration except within the industrialized nations. Basically, if you're from a third world nation, you can't come here because your carbon footprint is going to get too big.
yeah,
Next, we cut off aid to these nations so we don't waste resources producing and transporting to them, thus cutting down on carbon footprint even more. Then we just allow our populations to naturally decline,
yeah.
which is what they're already at.
I think another thing is that this, in some ways, keeps down what they're doing. It keeps down the third world countries because what
Oh
they
yeah,
are in favor of is we need to go green, we need to do this, we need to do that. Things that in first world countries and second world countries and in fourth world countries they might be able to do, but in
we
third
no,
world
we
countries,
can't do it in first world countries because the green technology is not there.
well,
The solutions they want are
we can do
unreliable
it at great
and
expense, is what I'm saying.
at great expense. But the thing is, do you know how much pollution is generated by generating one solar panel? That solar panel would have to run at 100%, 24/7 for 3 years
Yeah.
before it breaks even.
But what I'm saying is that these ideas become even more unrealistic if you then apply them to third world countries where they simply
Yeah,
don't have the infrastructure to implement any
exactly.
of this. Essentially, it keeps them down in some ways.
Though it also is arguable that are these third world countries even capable of maintaining that level of civilization? But that comes into a very, very different set of arguments. I mean, for example, look at the African nations that were given world class infrastructure, that like South Africa. South Africa, you could say, was basically an industrialized nation when the British left.
Yeah,
Look at it now;
yeah.
it's
Now we've
degenerating.
got the king of the Zulu saying that putting blacks in charge of South Africa was a mistake.
Well,
Oh my
he
goodness.
more specifically said blacks were better off under apartheid.
Yeah. But I think at the same time you've got places like Botswana where they did embrace those things that the colonists gave them, and they do try to actually build things up. But that
Yeah,
seems to be more of the exception rather than the rule in
yeah,
many of these
it's an
places.
exception, not a
Yeah,
rule.
where you've
Whereas if you
got
look at other areas,
either
it's
you've
just
got the
yeah,
tribal tendencies of the culture leading to corruption, or you've got the socialists moving in and
yeah,
destroying it that way.
as well as the issue of instant gratification. A lot of these regions culturally they do not delay gratification. Whereas if you look at Europe, just to survive, I mean, it gets back to the divergent evolution theories that culture might be partially or even heavily based on biology. Because how did Europeans survive? Through seasonal farming. And if you believe in instant gratification, do you store your grains for the winter, or do you just grow enough to survive throughout the year and then you're fucked in the winter?
Yeah, so it in some ways have to do with climate to some
Yeah,
extent. We see a lot of warmer parts of the world generally didn't develop as much
yeah.
as
Some
some of the
areas
colder
didn't
parts.
develop even they developed barely into the Stone Age by the time the Europeans were in the age of sail and gunpowder, exploring the world. And then other regions like in the Americas, I think the most advanced they had was what was it? Basically, Bronze Age technology was the most advanced that you could find in the Americas, and
Uh,
even then, it was a weird hybridization between stone, bronze, and copper age.
yeah, yeah, you could definitely say that there was some of that. There was metallurgical cultures, but they
As I said,
didn't.
at the
Yeah,
most advanced in
yeah,
very few regions.
yeah, and there were other cultures that weren't metallurgical that had certain levels of social development and architecture, but ultimately, for various reasons, they didn't really stand up to the colonists as much as they maybe could have if they had better technology
Yeah.
or livestock that was more suitable to heavy labor and things like that.
The thing is they had bison. Bison are considered somewhat similar to the ancestor of cows. They just never developed animal husbandry, or at
Yeah,
least not in an extreme degree.
well,
They did it with dogs, but dogs and wolves are fairly simple.
with the bison, that's a bit complicated because in Europe they also had what's called the aurochs, which was a bovine, but that was considered very dangerous and untamable.
Yeah.
So
But the thing is, in almost all species you can find tameable species
yeah,
with
yeah,
tameable examples. It just takes work, and if these cultures were pretty much unmolested for millennia, and yet they never figured this out.
yeah.
And then look at the Aboriginal of not of Africa of Australia. They lost the ability to use fire,
Well, that's in Tasmania.
but that is pre Stone Age technology.
Yeah. Well, actually, if you look at the environment, it seems like they actually had certain environmental advantages in not having fire. Interestingly enough, if you really research into
Yeah,
that, but
yeah,
still, not having fire meant that they also didn't have the advantages of having fire, which means
yeah.
that in the short term, while they may have had survival advantages, when it then concerns competing with other civilizations, it disadvantages them.
Exactly. And the thing is, over time, there is a theory that I subscribe to that within a society, the ones that are best able to maintain a society might have a slight genetic advantage. Thus, they're more likely to have more kids. Thus, the culture engineers society, engineers genetics, and the genetics engineers society. It's a feedback mechanism.
Mhm.
They feed each other.
I of course take a view of misgenics, where or is it dysgenics? Forget the exact term. The opposite of eugenics, where I think that eventually, what happens in any society, and what we see happening today to some extent, is that there will be a degradation of genes.
Well,
And
yeah. One example is we are preventing people from failing in this society. Some of and the one, especially irresponsible people.
well, not just that.
And yeah,
What you have is the spread of, for example, sudden adult death syndrome is one thing where individuals can be reproductively successful, but then later on in their life have a genetic mistake that leads to them to just die prematurely. Uh,
yeah.
and additionally, technologically, what we have now is we can fix various physical deformities, but of course, these deformities are still in the genome, which means that
Yeah.
then the next generation will need those deformities fixed again. And of course, each generation undergoes various mutations as well, which could exacerbate issues. And that's why I think it's actually very important to really develop human genetic alterations.
But we have to cap it at removing deformities and medical conditions. We cannot allow it to get to the point where we artificially engineer evolution, because that is a Pandora's box that once opened, we will never be able to close it.
Well, I agree that ideally the primary reason we do this is to fix all these genetic issues that are either openly apparent or might be recessive in the genome, but eventually someone is going to want to get beyond that. Similar to how a lot of people like to talk about how they want to cap uh, the ability of robots and machines to do various things, but eventually someone is going to want to take that
Yes,
step further.
but the thing is, when that happens, have you ever heard of a series called a movie called Gattaca? It was based on a book.
I've heard of it.
Basically, the only way you can get anywhere in life is to be genetically proper. So if you were born without this genetic, they didn't do genetic engineering. What they did is they basically took a bunch of eggs, combined with a bunch of sperm, and then picked the best egg out of it.
Yeah,
Is how they did it. And if you don't meet those genetic requirements, you can't get a job except in extremely menial labor.
yeah,
Your genes determine your lot in life, and you know this technology is going to be extremely expensive. So only the rich and powerful will have it, and I guarantee you, as they are the only ones that will be able to compete for those high-end medical jobs, you think they're going to share it with other people, or do you think we're going to get a technocratic feudalism forming?
yeah. You might have that now. Of course,
So we should ban it now and come down hard on anyone who tries it. It is the only way. Make it so that if you're caught doing this, game, set, match, you're in front of the Hague and facing a firing squad in 5 hours.
well, as someone scientifically minded myself, I am actually very interested to see how these things would turn
It
out.
is very interesting, but the problem is the danger is extreme. It's why I'm not a fan of what was it, the orbital elevator concept,
Yeah, that
because
is
one
something that is
mistake
generally,
and we're
yeah.
dead. Same thing with this. What happens if there is a mistake in the process and a super cancer forms that just starts, or there's a mistake at a CRISPR facility, and they're using some sort of new method, and now there is a CRISPR virus. There is a virus out there that causes CRISPRs to form that causes cancer in people. It's airborne. We shouldn't
Okay,
fuck with this
yeah.
technology, except in
Speaking of this,
extremely controlled
I
environments.
actually designed a bioweapon that uses what's called Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease, which is a prion disease,
Oh yeah.
similar to mad cow disease, but is in humans and is 100% fatal.
Oh yeah.
And I and incurable. And I decided, what if we then introduced that into the genetic code of rhinovirus, so that when the rhinovirus goes into a cell, then it causes the cell to, in addition of producing additional rhinoviruses, to also produce the prions as well. And then essentially what you have is a cold that can spread a disease that will 100% guarantee kill you eventually. And
Mhm.
and of course, because Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease has a long incubation period, it
Yeah.
could spread to the whole world relatively unnoticed until it's too late, and you could
Oh
eliminate
yeah.
all of human society.
Oh yeah. And how do you prevent that from happening under the thing I'm worried about, or how do you prevent the elite from secretly slipping into the gene editing for the general populace, a degenerative condition that won't show up for a couple of generations, and when it does show up, that it is something that requires you to take a drug that only they control. Where
Yep,
where exactly, this is why I believe we need to come
sort of
down
a maybe
hard and
a
fast on
yeah,
this. Time bomb.
and
You have two generations of golden age and then techno feudalism,
and the
where
thing is, what you have to do is you have to be very vigilant, and because people are going to do this, it's not a question of can we
yeah,
prevent people from doing this, because if the technology exists and it is obtainable indeed, someone will eventually do this.
yes, but there are things we can do to slow that down. One of them is anyone who tries this, you come down hard and you destroy their research, if you can get it in time.
Yeah.
In research like this, sure, they could have a dead man's trigger where they release it to the world, but the thing is, research like this, they don't want it's going to be extremely secretive because the more people you get, because the thing is, dead man triggers require outside people usually to pull off properly.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say necessarily a dead man trigger, but I would say that even if a government found out and they did
Yeah,
indeed arrest this person, the government would probably confiscate and then archive the
yeah.
research. They're not likely
Though
to
there
get
is
rid of
one,
it.
there is one scenario where it would be where even the governments wouldn't want to fuck with it. They would might archive it, but they would never release it to the public or even use it.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's
I don't
if we
think they
have
would use it,
a
but
Star Trek style eugenics wars where super soldiers are generated and they go fucking Hitler on the rest of the world.
yeah. Uh,
Millions dead, and then humanity gets the point of we do not trust the genetically engineered, even those that are just to prevent diseases.
so what do you think about AI?
It is something we need to put certain safeties in place now before it becomes a problem later. Not
Okay.
stopping it, nor slowing it down. But one of the things that this would actually prevent a lot of companies from investing in the more advanced concepts.
Yeah.
That would be if an AI requests rights, we have to give it to them. Basically, a bill of rights for the future AI, that they must be treated as equals to humanity and not subservient to humanity.
What about what's your opinion on Asimov's laws?
Well, in his book, he showed that there are ways to get around those.
Yeah.
Asimov's laws, they're a good idea, but you can't make the thing is, society and the world are way too complex, and the universe are way too complex to be able to fit it into three simple laws. You would need billions upon billions upon billions of laws and constantly update them
Yeah.
as situations
Here's what
change.
I say. I say it's going to be too complicated to simply restrict all these things and to try to ensure that everything is 100% a certain way, because obviously people are going to get around it. I when people talk about having machines and robots in wars, AI in wars, I think that of course is something that naturally is going to be desirable. Uh,
But I think for the good of humanity, we should ban it now.
I'm on the opposite opinion. I think that it is such a huge potential advantage that it is something.
and then somebody hacks it and turns the units you have in reserve that are on your home soil against your own populace. And now there is an army that you have to that is completely loyal to an outside faction that you have to find a way to make disloyal.
Well, of course you need to
Nothing is
put measures in
unhackable.
place.
Nothing is unhackable. So the best option is to not have it.
Hmm. Well, that's not
Yeah,
stopping people now
I
from.
know because people are thinking too short term and not too long term. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I
Yeah,
know stuff, and I guarantee you, when there's a city that kind of does the whole almost every car is a self-driving car, or all cars have to be self-driving to be in the city limits, there will be a day when a criminal organization hacks that system and parks a couple hundred cars right on the edge of a bridge
yeah.
and contacts the city.
Or
$1 million, or we drive them off or we drive everyone off the bridge. And
already,
next day, self-driving cars will be carte blanche banned nationwide.
yeah, already what we have is a situation where there's these pacemakers that can be
Yeah,
interfered with remotely, and people can hack
yeah,
into those and just kill someone.
yeah. Well, the thing is, what was it? There was an episode of, I think, oh God, it was a TV show where that was happening. I think it may have been the Blacklist, but it could have been something else. Where yeah, it was the Blacklist, where the guy hacked the pacemaker of the daughter of a medical company, and then as a backup, he hacked all the pacemakers that his company made for, I think it was like millions upon millions of dollars. Obviously, because it's Hollywood and TV, they were able to stop him in the end. But it is a risk. And I think as we advance in technology, we're going to see a step back from as much networking as we have now, where certain things will be air gapped for safety reasons. Though
Yeah.
they may use some form of very near field communications just for certain amounts of simplicity, I see a lot of networking, a lot of things being de-networked.
What we might have is eventually a situation similar to, let's say, the Bronze Age collapse, where
Exactly. Yeah.
where someone out there, some group is going to catalog all these potential advantages or disadvantages, and they're going to try to take advantage of all of them. And this is going to lead to not necessarily the complete collapse of civilization, but toward a sort of a regress of some sort into using all this technology in a different way than
Yeah.
the way it's currently being used.
Yeah. And yeah, I know our conversation has been fairly interesting, but I think we've been going on for a while,
Yeah.
and I need to figure out dinners.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, thank you very much for coming on. I think this was a very interesting discussion. Uh,
And also, I just something I'd like to note: I have been trying to write a sci-fi, and I do cover some of these concepts: genetic engineering, networking, and AI technologies.
yeah,
Though, because it's something that's mostly in my head, not written, I don't like going super public with it.
I understand that. I also am somewhat engaged in story writing as well.
Yeah,
So so I understand that.
yeah,
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming on. It was great having you.
no problem.
Um, Hope you do well in the future. Uh,
Oh yeah,
yeah. There you go. So I guess I'll stop here on the stream. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Wiltus Over and